Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Soulful Soul. My name is Gladys, for those who don't know me. Today, I'm starting an interesting new series on education, specifically education in South Africa, and what I think most of us will agree is an education crisis. The idea around the series is to confront, well, not confront, it's just to highlight the inequalities that have been brought to the surface by COVID-19, which were there all this time, which started during apartheid and which have continued. And to talk about what is being done and what's not being done and what needs to be done. And even, I'm not an intrepid journalist or anything like that, and I'm not trying to expose anything. For me, these series are conversations and maybe initiators of other conversations possibly. And the idea is just to share insights and get a different perspective on, or people's perspective, ordinary people's perspectives and experiences of issues. So this is one of the issues that I'm really interested in, well, I'm concerned with, as I know many are, others are. So if you are interested, if you have a different perspective or an interesting perspective you'd like to share, you might want to share as a parent, a learner, a concerned citizen, an academic, an expert, an education expert, a student, please, I would really welcome that, because I really would like to hear as many voices as possible and different perspectives. The idea, again, is for us to uncover people's experiences, their perceptions, their feelings, and their realities, so that we can just open up the conversation. And perhaps it could lead to innovation. Who knows? Perhaps we will one day do education differently. I think that every conversation counts and everything that is put out there is important. So today I'll be speaking to Professor Relebohile Moletsane, who's based at UKZN. Lebo is the J.L. Dube Chair in rural education. She has a special interest in rurality, gender, sexuality, sexual violence, and participatory visual methods. Her teaching interests include rural education, education and development, curriculum studies, gender and education. But I will also put a bio in the description box below. So I hope you enjoy, and I really welcome any contributions, anything you feel like would be important and interesting, or different perspective, or I mean, you could be someone who's concerned with science and girl children, or just science in general. If you would like to come and speak about that, that would be so welcome. You might be someone that's a proponent of outschooling or homeschooling. It would be awesome to hear your views. It's just a discussion and a highlighting of important issues here. Okay, thank you, everyone. And so in those first few years, what did we do practically, and what worked well, and what, in your opinion, didn't work?
Yeah. So the first thing I think that we did was to create this one system of education, and the South African Schools Act reflects that intention. Well and good that we created this one system of education on paper, in policy. However, we all know that in reality, we don't have one system of education. Mm-hmm. We have different systems of education, with the resourced areas and schools having a more advanced system of education, and with the Black and poor, and particularly rural, continuing to have a poor provision in terms of education.
Yeah.
The second thing that we did was, of course, to change the curriculum. Educating for citizenship. If we view education as meant to educate the citizenry, then we had to change the framework, the curriculum framework in the country, and hence the introduction of outcomes-based education in South Africa. And from my perspective, outcomes-based education on its own was a good framework. Mm-hmm. I think, but there were mistakes made in terms of implementing it. Yeah. So in the initial workshops, for example, people were told to drop everything they were doing before outcomes-based education, because this is a completely new system of education. That was in terms of communicating what it was, how it was supposed to be implemented. The second mistake that was made was in terms of underestimating the legacy of the apartheid system. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So if I retrace my steps, in the 80s, mid-80s to early 90s, those of us who were around would remember that there were a lot of protests. So not a lot of schooling happened, like being in class and actually teaching and learning. I was a teacher and or a lecturer in colleges of education at that time. And in some cases, in a year, we would spend maybe 2 months doing actual teaching. Yeah. So if you take that into consideration, it means that the students who finished their matric during those years were undereducated. Mm-hmm. They still passed their exams, good for them, but they didn't spend adequate time in the classroom to have mastered the content. The teacher trainees in the colleges, the same thing. So what then we inherited after 94 were teachers who were trained during the 80s and therefore received inadequate training. So not only were the teachers in some of the poorer schools underqualified, there were also some who were unqualified. So unqualified and underqualified teachers. And then you bring this, post-94, you bring this very sophisticated curriculum framework and pedagogy. And you're asking teachers with that kind of training to implement a very poorly communicated framework. And so, as you can tell, that spells disaster for many of the schools with those poorly or under-educated, underqualified teachers that they had.
And then, you know, this thing about OBE, I was just saying, as a person who was involved in adult basic education, I think lots of us were excited about OBE because that, you know, and Freirean methods and working with the learner from where they are, all those kinds of things. We were so excited, but actually the conditions weren't there, right?
Yeah. The conditions, the resources, right. The skills, the understanding of what OBE actually was requiring teachers and learners to do. So the communication in particular, and how it was framed. For example, in terms of the teacher was no longer a teacher now, was a facilitator. So in terms of teachers understanding what their role was,
Yeah.
it was like the children now have to do the work themselves. So there was a lot of getting children to go home and ask their parents.
Uh-huh.
And if I use my aunt as an example, she never set foot in school.
Mm-hmm.
So expecting her to respond to educational issues, science issues that the children themselves did not even properly understand was just asking a lot and a recipe for disaster. Whereas my daughter, if my daughter came home, I'm educated, I have a PhD,
Yes.
I know exactly what is being asked.
Yeah.
So again, perpetuating the inequalities
Yes.
with a system that was meant to address those inequalities was one of the mistakes that we have made in the last 25 years.
Yeah.
When I started working at the university, my work was in township schools. But then I quickly realized that actually where my work is needed is in rural schools. Mm-hmm. Because I used to teach in rural schools when I was a high school teacher myself. Okay. So as I said, what we inherited was a very unequal system. It was not only unequal in terms of resources, racially based resourcing. Mm-hmm. It was also unequal in terms of geographic location. Mm-hmm. And the two are linked because most rural schools, except for the wealthy private schools, were meant for Black African and in some areas colored children. And I continue to use apartheid racial categories, as problematic as they are, yeah, just to illustrate. Yes. And so this continues to today. So, for example, if I'm going to go to a rural school or to rural schools on a particular day, I have to prepare not only for the work that I'm going to do, but also I have to prepare and not to drink any fluids because I don't want to have to use the loos. Mm-hmm. In the toilet. You know how terrible that makes me feel. Mm-hmm. Because I know that the toilets in those schools are unusable. Mm-hmm. And yet we're expecting teachers and children who teach and learn in those schools to use those kinds of toilets day in and day out. Yeah. So in some schools, there would be one toilet for, 1,000 children. And even that one toilet is not really functional. For the teachers, the same thing. So that's one thing. So very poorly resourced schools in terms of infrastructure, but also poverty within the surrounding community. So you know that those children come from homes that are struggling to put food on the table. As a result, most of the schools have feeding schemes. Yes. To try and address that. So that's one. The second thing is that in addition to the infrastructure, the schools themselves, in terms of teaching resources, do not have those things. And thirdly, they continue to be staffed by either underqualified teachers. I think we've almost addressed the issue of unqualified teachers.
Yeah.
But having said that, some schools rely on people, young people who have passed matric, to fill the many posts that are vacant and that qualified teachers do not want to take up in rural areas. And we can't really blame them, because if I can, I would want to go and teach in a better resourced school. So most teachers are always looking to go outside of the rural areas. Even those who teach in rural areas do not live in those areas. So my experience is that in the morning, teachers are struggling to get to school. So there's late coming for both learners and teachers. And as soon as they arrive at school, late as they come, they're already thinking about how they are going to get back to the city in the afternoon. What transport are they going to use to get back? So attention to teaching and learning is compromised under those conditions. So it's a very complex web of challenges that face rural teachers and rural schools. With the rural learner really having the short end of the stick, of the education stick.
Lebo, so then I want to, this is a two-parter. So my question is, where are we now? But it's before COVID and then COVID. Yeah, if that makes sense. Yeah.
So up to COVID, very little had changed in rural schools. Obviously, with the emphasis on matric exam results, some of the schools have done an amazing job with very little to try and get decent results for the learners in those schools. So they have succeeded in spite of the system. And I think we should acknowledge that there are some rural schools, poor rural schools, that have done wonderfully well. But on the main, rural schools continued to struggle even before COVID. In terms of the issues that I've mentioned, physical resources, infrastructure, teaching resources, as well as human resources in terms of teachers and related stuff. So when COVID happened, and there was this call for people to go online, again, we were assuming that all schools would be able to go online. And yet all of us are talking about how rural areas continue to be disadvantaged in terms of access to technology, and even worse, access now to the internet. So obviously, teachers and schools in rural areas had to dig deep in terms of how they go to teach online during lockdown. And I know that a number of them used WhatsApp, and WhatsApp still needs data. So I can imagine, I haven't done the empirical work, but I can imagine many children able that because of the lack of access to data for obvious reasons. And so again, the better resourced schools in the suburbs and cities continued to benefit or continued to do well, even with during COVID. Because of course we have internet in our homes in the city, we have access to computers that our children could use, and teaching continued, even though it was online. And that is not to say that those teachers didn't also have to dig deep, but their digging deep was shallower than the digging deep that rural teachers had to contend with.
And
so in my view, that there hasn't been, in many schools, there hasn't been learning since much for many of the children who go to rural schools.
And even, Lebo, I think even there, the black-white divide shows itself, right? Like, and class, I guess. They're so intricately linked. And even in, I'm sure even in schools in the city, black schools have been worse affected, because how many families can afford to get a laptop or whatever the case might be. It's, and so I guess the thing is that gap, that huge gap that still exists, that we inherited and then continue to exist, and then COVID even
has
made
exacerbated it. Even children here next to me in Cato Manor, even if they have access to the internet or to data for WhatsApp and so on, where are they going to isolate from the rest of the family so that they can attend a class online? There is no room. They live in one room, shared with many members of the family. So where are they going to be in class away from the rest of the family during lockdown? It's just impossible.
So before I wanted to go on to what the imperatives are, but I thought maybe a nice question is, what in your mind is one good thing, one thing that we got right, and one thing that we got really wrong? Meaning the new South Africa, newish.
In terms of education, it's very hard for me to be positive. I guess creating a single system on paper is one achievement that we've had. What we've gotten wrong is translating that that intent into practical and visible benefits for learners in various socio-economic contexts.
Okay, and then so then what in your mind are the imperatives now? What are we facing?
The imperatives for me, and I hear government people going on about the what are they called? The fourth industrial revolution. And I shudder, because I think unless we get, and I'll sound like an old person, and I am an old person, but my observation in many schools is that unless we get the basics right, unless that child knows how to read for comprehension, the fourth industrial revolution will just be a buzzword for many of these children. So I think what we need to do is to teach reading, the basics, reading and writing, and teach it very well. And what that requires are basic resources like books and access to books. We could have access to reading material online, but access to books is still, for me, the basic thing that many schools require. And you hardly find this in many of the schools. I've seen boxes and boxes of books, and I assume it's textbooks, sometimes in principal's office, that have never been opened. So I don't know what the problem is.
Yeah.
But also some schools really struggle to get access to reading materials. So if I were, I don't know, influential in education, I would institute a basic literacy, reading, and numeracy programming right from grade R. Because unless we get it right in the foundation phase, matric, which we seem to obsess about, is too late to change things for the child. Unless the child has got that basic foundation from the early years, it's too late to try and catch them up when they are in matric.
Okay. So,
and I would sign up for teaching reading, by the way.
Yeah.
So I'm not, and because I think it really is where we are getting it wrong.
Yes. Okay. So
and you can see it when these children come to university.
Yeah.
They can hardly write.
Yeah.
And I'm not just talking about children coming from township and rural schools. We're getting it wrong even in the suburbs and the city, in the well-resourced schools. Those children cannot read and write properly. So I think we are getting that wrong.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So I had a question, where to from here, which is a similar question. So, okay, so that this other question that I ask a lot, actually, because I think that it's anyway, I'd like to know from you what you think. It feels to me like we put academia as the pinnacle of intelligence in a way, right? And I'm saying this as a non-academic, and happily non-academic, but it's almost like we sell academia, or at least university academics, as the only alternative once a young person leaves school. And yet there are so many different ways to express our intelligence. Some of us are more cut out to be doing like practical things, hands-on things and whatever. So what is your view on that, Lebo, and what do you think we should be doing?
I think again it's the legacy of apartheid education. And where as Black people we were always looking to the other side, to white education as the standard. And that white education, unfortunately, was we saw it only part of it. So what we aspire to are the white collar jobs. And those white collar jobs require us to go to university. My colleague and I, Lisa and Lori, who doesn't work for the university, started this project where around July, August, September, we go out schools to try and help matric learners apply for post-school education.
Okay.
And we would spend like 3 days in a school where we would help the learner understand their strengths and understand where they might go. And then present to them various options, starting with the FET colleges and learnerships and so on. And I have to tell you, the children used to laugh when we presented the learnerships and FET options to them. So like I would give them examples that if you are a plumber, this is like a good occupation to have, and you earn a lot of money.
Yes.
If you are a landscaper, that's a lot of money and a lot of skill. You don't need to go to university to learn how. They used to laugh at me. All of them wanted to go to university. And all of them wanted to be engineers or doctors and so on. And you would ask, so what's your maths score? And they would say, well, in June I got 20%. Yeah. And you would say, so if you want to be an engineer, this is how what the score should be by the end of the year. Oh, I think I can work hard and get that by the end of the year.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's I'm not sure where we can start. I think we can start maybe around the time when children are choosing their subjects in grade 10. I think it is grade 10. Mm-hmm. To try and not force, but present these options that early to children, and to make them normal, to normalize not going to university, but going to a post-school institution and learning a trade, and so on. Because I think people who go and learn a trade are regarded as somehow doff.
Yes.
And so they don't want to accept in front of their peers that that's what they are going to do, because then they will be regarded as doff.
Yes.
But I think it's a huge mistake.
Yeah. Okay. And then, Lebo, where to from here, do you think? Any last words you'd like to share?
I think those two, for me, it's those 2 points, or maybe more. So getting the basic literacy and numeracy as early as grade R, attending to that. And secondly, attending, it's been 25 years now, to the unequal resourcing of schools in the country, so that rural schools are also a conducive environment for teachers to work in, but also, more importantly, for learners to learn. And thirdly, to address the many social, to understand and address the many social issues that impact on schools and teachers and learners, some of which are related to class issues, racial issues, gender issues, and health and wellness, and they obviously they are interlinked. So in my view, we have a lot of work to do.
Yeah.
But again, focusing on the basics will get us far.
Okay. So so thank you so much for your time, Lebo. I really appreciate it. This is kicking off the series. I'm so excited about it, So thank you.
Okay, ladies, nice talking to you.
Thanks, Lebo.
Fantastic.